I'm Liam Thompson. I'm a member of the Atakakuk Cree Nation, Treaty 6 out in Saskatchewan. I've been with Homeward Trust for over 7 years in a couple of different roles, but right now I'm the manager of Indigenous initiatives, and I'm very happy to be. We have our land acknowledgement here. I like to say my own land acknowledgement. Typically, we speak about how we are visitors on this land, but I'm not. This is my home territory of Treaty 6, and I'm very proud and blessed to be able to work and live on my territory as well. I want to recognize and raise my hands to all the Indigenous peoples who have stewarded this land since time immemorial. So we're going to get right into it. Like I said, we don't have a ton of time. So really, I'm here today to talk specifically about Homeward Trust's engagement practices for engaging Indigenous peoples and the work that we do here in working towards ending homelessness. Maybe you can pick up some tips here or learn from the way that we've been doing things. But I'm just going to talk about what we do specifically. So this is how Homeward Trust is governed. As you can see, 4 of our 9 board members identify as Indigenous. It's a requirement. Really, that's to ensure that we're being held accountable at a board level. So our CEO is being held accountable by a group of Indigenous peoples who come from a broad range of diverse experiences. You'll see here on the left, we have our advisory committees, and on the right, we have our operational committees, and below our systems engagement. I'm going to go into all of these more specifically, but wanted to provide you a little bit of an overview right here so you understand how Homeward Trust administration is informed. So speaking to that, I like to talk about our engagement sort of in circles of engagement. So we have the Indigenous Advisory Council, Indigenous Circle, Indigenous Gathering, and Lived Experience Expertise Committees as well here. Speaking a little bit more about those specifically, so our Indigenous Advisory Council is comprised of is one of the committees comprised of our community boards. So the community advisory boards are a requirement from the Government of Canada through Reaching Home, but we like to go above and beyond and really ensure that the people that we have there on the Indigenous Advisory Council are comprised of, like I said, a diverse group of individuals who identify as Indigenous. So that's First Nations, Métis, Inuit, status, non-status. We try and have representation from individuals who have an understanding of houselessness and homelessness in Edmonton, whose work touches health, justice, housing, social work, really so that they're able to provide us with as strong advice and guidance as possible. What the Indigenous Advisory Council does is they provide us with advisory capacity and on all services, initiatives, and programs that serve Indigenous people experiencing homelessness. What that looks like in practice is when we're working on the development of a supportive housing site within Edmonton, we convene the Indigenous Advisory Council to provide us with that guidance and that advice on how these sites are best going to be developed in order to serve Indigenous peoples, what programs and services need to be in place there. Everything from program design to the actual functional space of the building, ensuring that cultural space is available, ensuring that ceremony can be practiced in that space as well too. So the Indigenous Circle, which I spoke about earlier, is an expanded group from the Indigenous Advisory Council. And so the Indigenous Advisory Council and Homeward Trust work in collaboration in order to convene these group of Indigenous stakeholders who meet on a quarterly basis. The difference here is that we'll focus on specific topics and issues related to Indigenous peoples experiencing homelessness in Edmonton, rather than absolutely everything, which is what goes to the Indigenous Advisory Council. This one is a little bit different, where we have membership from nations, Métis settlements, Indigenous agencies, and individuals, where the Indigenous Advisory Council is mainly comprised of representation from individuals. The intent here is that we're always trying to work with the surrounding community in Edmonton, and we know that Edmonton is a gathering place for Indigenous peoples, and working with those nations, those settlements, those Inuit communities, to gather and focus on specific topics and issues that are directly affecting their membership, really allows us to have strong and meaningful relationships with each other, and best understand how we can develop services and initiatives and really be held accountable for the work that we do here in Edmonton. So this is a newer initiative that we've recently started. We meet on a quarterly basis and focus on improving coordinated access, to understanding how we might be able to develop strong relationships with services that are offered by the nations or by those settlements for people who are accessing services at Homeward Trust. The Indigenous Gathering is another form of engagement that we have here at Homeward Trust, that we hold on an annual basis. And really, this isn't the purpose of this event isn't for Homeward Trust to talk about how great we are or all the amazing work that we're doing. Certainly, there's a little bit of that, but really the intention here is to showcase local Indigenous and Indigenous serving agencies and initiatives within the community. A lot of important work is happening, and so there's always new and emergent programs and services and agencies coming up in Edmonton, and we really just want to use this opportunity to show that to as many people as possible. It's typically attended by First Nations leadership, Métis settlement leadership, and then also non-Indigenous. The mayor and city council typically attends this as well too. So it's a really amazing opportunity for us to show what is working in community, and the different ways that agencies and initiatives are approaching ending Indigenous homelessness. So beyond direct engagement and those circles of engagement, we want to and strive and I think do achieve including Indigenous peoples and Indigenous voices from inception of our community strategies. I believe, and I always say and make sure that it's known to the leadership at my organization, that if we're going to do engagement with Indigenous communities, or if we're going to develop strategies, that Indigenous peoples need to be included from the beginning. I think more often than not, Indigenous engagement is seen as kind of a check mark on a list of engagement, and I really want to step away from that the way of doing things and do things in a good way. So an example of this is the community plan to end homelessness that we started developing in 2023. The intent of the community plan is to set out community developed strategies through engagement, through strategy development sessions with agencies, individuals, nations, and I think most importantly, individuals with lived expertise. So this community plan was led and informed by Indigenous peoples. It was led in collaboration with an Indigenous organization, Pipiquan Petequan. Matt Ward and Elliot Young really helped us lead this work and informed our strategy and how we did this. We took an approach developed by, I think it was Cindy Gladue, called the Visiting Way. And really, it's the intent behind this is rather than coming to individuals with lived expertise or individuals who are leaders in community, elders and knowledge keepers, with a set of questions, or your other typical engagement strategies that are quite formal and structured. We just sat down and had conversations, shared tea and had lunch, shared dinners together, and just had a conversation about what people were feeling, what they were experiencing. We had engaged over 150 lived and living experts. So that's individuals, with experiences of homelessness or currently experiencing homelessness, along with 150 plus individuals who are representative of over 30 service provider organizations in order to gather information on what we want our community strategies to look like. I don't think that you can create a strategy with buy-in unless the people who are going to be we're all collaborators in this work. And if we're not talking with each other about what we want to see for the future of ending homelessness in Edmonton, it just can't be done. So in addition to those engagements that we've done with lived experts for specific strategies such as this community plan, there's also 2 lived expertise committees at Homeward Trust who are mainly comprised of Indigenous people here. So we have a youth advisory group, which is those who are 16 to 24 with lived or living experiences of homelessness. So these are either people who are currently experiencing homelessness or have gone through the Housing First program and are currently housed. And same goes for those the participant advisory committee. But those folks are 18 plus. Both of these committees meet on a monthly basis and have done some really, really important work in our community. I think most notably and most recently presented at Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness was their Kawika Hanawak Housing First training. And that was them taking the Housing First training practices and principles and applying their lens of lived expertise to those. And really, the intent there is to be shared with frontline workers and to better prepare them for the realities of working with people experiencing homelessness. And when they're taught these principles and these practices to remember to treat people like people. I think hearing it from somebody who has that lived expertise is just so much more powerful when you're going into something that you maybe have never done before. And the work that we do here is hard work. Part of my role here at Homeward Trust is really building up the internal capacity of our organization. This is on something that's ongoing, but I really strive to build up being a non-Indigenous organization and really having our staff are predominantly non-Indigenous. I think it's so important to ensure that every staff member at Homeward Trust learn of the historic and contemporary realities of Indigenous peoples in Canada. Whether you're a frontline worker or you work in finance and you're writing checks, I think that all the work that we do here has an effect on Indigenous people. So I strive to provide Indigenous-led training. We've had staff sweats previously before COVID, which we're looking to start up as well. Medicine picking opportunities, webinars, resources, opportunities to connect with elders and knowledge keepers and hear those stories and take that into our lives and into the work that we do here. And then events and collaborating agency opportunities throughout the year as well too. It's so important to me that we do this because rather than whenever something Indigenous specific comes up, obviously I want to be as involved as possible, but being able to have an understanding of how to approach this and how to say, okay, we need to have Indigenous peoples engaged at the beginning of the process, or not just be the person that they go to say, hey, what should I do about this, or what's protocol, what's proper practice for the work that we're doing here. So on that, I can't be in every room or in every space, and so really I try and help staff understand and respect the importance of forging and maintaining relationships with elders, knowledge keepers, nations, settlements, Inuit communities, agencies, and individuals. That's everything from having dinners, meeting people where they're at on their land, honoring them for their time and paying them for their experience, coming with protocol and doing things in the right way. Like I said, I can't be everywhere at once, but I can at least impart the knowledge that has been imparted on me and make sure that we're showing up in a good way and in the right way. I'd be remiss not to have a conversation about Red Road Healing Society. So I'm sure you've heard Homeward Trust refer to themselves as a system planner in the past and currently now, but we're in a world where there are many systems planners. Homeward Trust previously received the Indigenous specific Reaching Home funds from the Government of Canada up until a couple of years ago when an Indigenous specific community entity was determined, and that was Red Road. I'm a really strong believer in for Indigenous, by Indigenous programs, services, initiatives, and agencies across Canada. And so I think that this is a really exciting thing. But it definitely changed the way that we do things in our community. I think it's been a really good change, but it really went back to how important having those relationships are with each other are. When funding is being transferred, and really at the end of the day, this is like people's lives. Programs that we previously funded are now being transferred over to another organization. We really want to make sure that there is no duplication of services, that service doesn't stop for everybody, and that nobody ends up unhoused because of this change. So we've really made a commitment to working with each other and sitting on each other's community advisory boards. They sit on our Indigenous Advisory Council, and they're building up their own Indigenous Advisory Council as well too, that we plan on sitting on in the future. While Homeward Trust doesn't have a government mandate to specifically serve Indigenous peoples anymore, we have a commitment to community. So just because those funds aren't directly delivered to us anymore, it doesn't mean that the funds that we do receive aren't specifically allocated towards Indigenous people. So we still continue to develop supportive housing and fund programs that are specifically for Indigenous peoples experiencing homelessness, because we know how important it is that those services exist. I had to be short. There's a lot of work that we do here, and I could talk about this for a really long time, but I want to provide you all the opportunity to maybe ask me any questions that you might have, and speak to anything maybe I've forgotten to speak about. Somebody who raised their hand. Yeah, Samantha.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. One question that I had, so you spoke about the informal engagement being really important to the work that you do. And I was wondering if you could just speak a bit more to sometimes the challenges or maybe the tensions that can exist between doing that formal engagement, which oftentimes we need for funding reports or for some of those, kind of reporting requirements, versus the informal engagement and knowing how powerful that is to building relationship. I was just wondering if you could kind of speak to how you've navigated that in your work.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think Indigenous peoples are probably the most quote unquote engaged demographic here in Canada, and a lot of that engagement has been incredibly extractive in the past, and I think people are pretty burnt out as far as engagement goes. Often things are talked about, several times, and people will say, like, I've shared my thoughts on this, I've shared my experience. Why do we need to keep on talking about this? And so I think that that's why it's so important to develop those relationships before you go and do these engagements, and really be held accountable to the work that you are doing as well too. A practice that I've used in the past is asking people how they want to be engaged. So often, agencies, organizations, government bodies are dictating what that engagement looks like, and they're not asking people, hey, what's the conversation that you want to have, or how do you want to be engaged? I know that we all have deliverables. We have deliverables as well too, obviously being a government funded organization. But I believe that, because of our strong relationships that we've been able to create, but prior to having these more formal engagements, our relationship is genuine. They know our intentions. They know, that how we're serving our community. They know the relationship that we have with each other, and the reason for why we're doing things. And so I would say, rather than waiting until something comes where you need to have those formal engagements, you need to develop those reports, really forge those relationships beforehand. And like I said, it can be just having a dinner, just having a conversation, understanding how you can collaborate with each other and share information with each other. I really want eliminating that extractive relationship that has gone on for so long.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Graham.
Thanks. That was a really great question and info. I'm wondering how you report back to the people you engage. I know you talked about some of the processes being more committees, so they're people that you may regularly be in contact with, but also when you do the Indigenous gathering and maybe there's more unfamiliar faces or new people how do you then kind of ensure that you're being a good steward of the information and experiences that they're sharing, and whether it's just to share what you heard or whether it's to share what you did with it or how you interpreted it. And then along with that, like, do you ever kind of ask them to review the accuracy of how you've captured it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think there's a couple of different answers I can give you here, because I mean, engagement can look so different on who you're engaging and like what who's in the room. I think that you need to be really intentional about how that information is going to be circulated back with the community, and it needs to be built in from the beginning of the engagement. It can't be like an afterthought of like, oh yeah, we should share this. I think a good example is like the engagements that we did with individuals with living expertise. So these are people who, we might not know where they are on a given day. And so they might be, sleeping outside or sleeping in shelter, couch surfing, whatever that their situation might be, and don't have easy access to a phone or email. And so, building it out so that we have an opportunity to develop like an information session where we can report back to the community, say like, hey, on this day, on these days, we're going to come back and share, the information that we captured, share how we use this information, as far as like, confirming the authenticity of the information that we captured. We try and do that in a as structured way as possible as well too. I know through like the lived expertise committees here at Homeward Trust, whenever we're working on something together, we'll always send out information back to them and say, hey, before we do anything with this, I just want to make sure that the information that I have written down here, I'm not skewing your words, I'm not changing the way that you've said things, and that this is as authentic of a capture of information as you think it is, to what you said and to the point that you're trying to get across. So really working with people in order to ensure that we're being authentic in the information that we're presenting and the information that we're using to better services here.
Thanks, that's really helpful. And it just kind of reminds me that we need to build that into the timeline. And like you said, if you develop it from the beginning, then you make time and space for people to digest it or to report back to them, rather than thinking that like the engagement is the end of it in your timeline of engagement period.
Yeah, absolutely. And always asking people like, how do you want this information to be shared with you as well too. Like improving our data practices. We can say like, how do you want this data shared with you? Like, what is going to be the most useful to you? Because just giving them a download list of everything that we have, might be useful to some person, but it more often than not, they're looking at specifics, and inundating them with information is not helpful. So
Thank you.
yeah. I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. Yeah, Mohammed.
Hi, thank you for this. Thank you for this presentation. I wanted to ask a question related to something you mentioned a bit earlier, which was making sure in planning for housing, the importance of like Indigenous gathering spaces as something that should be considered or integrated into planning forward when it comes to housing, particularly for Indigenous communities. So I just wanted to know if you have other examples or thoughts that we should be taking into consideration that some of us may not be thinking of when it comes to housing for Indigenous communities, such as like the importance of gathering spaces, some of the other stuff you mentioned.
Yeah, I think obviously depending on where you live and like what community this housing is being developed in, I think really you need to connect with elders and knowledge keepers to inform the development of those spaces. You know, what ceremony looks like for you know, a Cree person like me is going to look very different for a Blackfoot community. And so, you know, if elders are going to be involved in the housing that's being developed, making sure that you're working with them and having conversations with them about you know, how they can make that space accessible for culture, for ceremony. You know, there's I think it would be probably a little bit too much for me to go in like the absolute specifics about what a space actually needs to be designed and needs to look like for you know, ceremony that's prevalent here in Treaty 6. But you know, big things to consider, you know, the direction of an entrance, you know, privacy, you know, making sure that like considerations about like alcohol use and drug use, you know, there's a lot that goes into it. I'd be happy to, you know, connect with you if you're looking for specifics after, because it's kind of a long conversation. And it can be very unique dependent on, you know, the space that you're in as well too. So often than not, we have limited resources and we kind of have to work with what we have, but there's definitely you know, steps that you can take in order to make those places as accessible and as welcoming as possible.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no worries.
Response.
Okay. Well, I know we're a couple minutes over. You know, I'm always happy to connect with anybody in community. So feel free to send me a message if anything comes up. Yeah, the presentation is going to be recorded and can be shared afterwards. Feel free to send me a message, and I'd be happy to connect.